After we've submitted all of those files that Nate and I indicated, we now go through the end of year approval process, which is the certification process. Okay, so let's just discuss a brief overview of how the process is. Right, of course, you have to submit your files throughout the year. Once that's submitted, you then move on to checking if you have certification error or the CDDs and clear those. So when you have errors, you have to go back and resubmit files or manually update records in CalPads if you only have a few errors to correct. Now, there are different resources you could refer to be able to determine how to correct these certification errors. And we will discuss that in a few minutes. It doesn't make sense to go straight to looking at your reports before clearing your CERT errors, because more often than not, your reports will be incomplete because any student that triggers CDDs and certification errors will not be counted on the report. So make sure that you clear all certification errors first before looking at your reports. Once you are ready to look at your reports, review both aggregate and supporting reports. You also have to engage or at least include all of the departments that are part of the reporting. You have your probably attendance for all your task reports. You have your RFEP report, and which should be reviewed by your EL department. So it's not just about you looking at the data. If you're a big school, big district, then you have to involve your stakeholders. Okay. Then once you've reviewed your reports and have determined that the reports are accurate, you have to click on LEA approval, and that would then signal your SELPA to review the reports. And this SELPA's involvement is because of any incident that or any incidents that any SPED student have been involved in. So if you have SPED students that were or that were suspended, then your SELPA would be able to also see that. They'll have access to your incident reports and see if those incidents of seclusion or restraints involving SPED students are accounted for. And once they sign off on that, they click on the SELPA approve button and you're done with certification. Now, if your SELPA sees some inconsistencies, then it goes back to resubmitting files or manually adding records to CalPads, and the cycle goes back to correcting errors if there are a lot of those. So that's just an overview of the certification. So let's go to CalPads demo, and hopefully our test page is functioning properly today. Okay, so again, once you've submitted your data in CalPads, expect the next process is your certification, right? So let me just go to our training page here. And then click on certification status. So of course, you have all certifications or all submissions that you are expected to certify. There are some who are elementary schools that might not have EOY 1. That's fine. Don't be alarmed. That's okay, right? And there are some who are K to 8. And so there is a probability that you have end of year 1 as well. You may need to certify that. You don't meet any requirements to report departmentalized courses. So that's just a hint on end of year 1. Let's go to end of year 3. As you can see, you have here your total errors and warnings. And just a reminder, it is important to coordinate with staff to be able to successfully manage and also correct data if you have any of your 4 errors with your SPED folks. So this is your certification details, LEA. You have here your summary section. It provides you a summary of the revision that you're looking at. By default, if you have not LEA approved yet, or if you have not marked a snapshot revision in review, you will always have just one revision status. Okay. So once you've marked a certain snapshot to be in review, so let's say you've brought down your errors to 0 and you're not yet ready to approve your reports, you can mark this as in review to freeze this version of the snapshot. That way, if you make corrections later on, or if someone submits additional files, it doesn't impact or it doesn't trigger a new revision. You freeze this version with your 0 errors, right? So let's say if you freeze this and you submit new data and that data triggered new errors, then you have the insurance policy. You have the insurance of having to have a snapshot that has been frozen with the correct number of records that you have for that snapshot, or you have 0 errors. So that's one version. That's one way to look at it. Take advantage of the revision status when trying to correct errors, right? So if you are LEA approved, you really don't need to decertify or disapprove before submitting files. You can stay LEA approved and continue submitting files or adding records in to correct any discrepancies that your SELPA may have seen. Okay. So there is a whole tutorial on how to toggle this and how to take advantage of this functionality. It is again in the CalPads YouTube channel. If anyone could post that here, let's just go there. So you just go to the basics functionality, and it should be somewhere under the CalPads intro and basics. So if you scroll here, you should find CalPads snapshot revision. So there is a full playlist of this. There is a short version just with Alex explaining the benefits of toggling between snapshots, and then there is the full snapshot revision and approval process that Nate discussed in detail, the same process I'm demoing right now. Okay. So that's that. And then of course, copy this, paste that there. Okay, thank you. So that's that. And then the next section of the certification page is the SELPA approval. So this will help you determine who your SELPA is. Obviously, if you're new to CalPAS, then you will see who your SELPA is and who will be doing your second approval. Okay. Then, of course, you have your certification validation. So you have your certification fatal summary and your warning summary. Okay, so let's go to the fatal summary, and it gives you a list of all of the CDDs and the certification errors that your records may have triggered after posting your files to CalPads. So these are your common errors that you will have. You have CERT4, CERT67, 128, 129, 131, and then some errors involving your incident records, as well as validation between the stats and your incident data. So we will demo how to resolve some of this in just a few minutes. And below that is your certification reports. This is where you will be reviewing your reports after you've brought down your fatal errors to 0. So after a new snapshot triggered and you have 0 errors, Then you go on and review the reports. So you have here your aggregate reports. These are the minimum reports you need to review before CalPAS activates a small box here that would allow you that you need to check, and then that would then activate your LEA approve button here. Okay, so we have more than you need to look at each report and need to scroll to the bottom to be able to review all of it. Then, of course, it doesn't make sense to just look at counts. You also have to look at the actual supporting reports where you have the student list to be able to determine that all of your students are accounted for on the reports, right? And then at the bottom is your snapshot history. Your snapshot history contains the different snapshots that happened or were triggered based on any data corrections you did, right? So once a record is posted and CalPAS detects it, it will put you in queue for a snapshot. And once you have a snapshot, you will have that history in here. This is important, especially the revision ID when communicating with your CELPA. So there are times when you are LEA approved and you don't want to decertify, right? So you are still LEA approved. By default, CalPAS will show the LEA approved status on the reports that your CELPA will be looking at. So if you want them to look at a revised uncertified version, then make sure that you communicate with them with the actual status that you want of the report version that you want them to see, and indicate the revision ID. That way, they are looking at the correct report that you want them to check. And if they verify that that version is correct, that's when you decertify or disapprove your LEA version and then approve with this version. Okay, so that's just a short summary of the page. Let's move on to how to correct errors. Okay, so there are some errors here that are, as I've mentioned, you have your CERT4, 67, 128, 131. Then, of course, you have your CERT1. Let's start with CERT1. If you look at your end of year 3 and you have a CERT1, by all means, you need to submit a ticket to us if you have schools that are showing a CERT1 and that school did not have any enrollment this year. So let's say you are operating a day school or any special school that is still active in CDEs. And so you need to account for any enrollments, right? If that school never had an enrollment this year or did not operate this year, then by all CalPAS will trigger a CERT1 if you don't have any data. So to get rid of this, please send us a ticket right away requesting that CDE takes the school out from the end of year expected schools table. You have to do that as soon as possible if you see one, because it takes forever for CDE to be able to update the expected schools table. So it would be beneficial for you guys to do that as soon as you see a CERT1. Now, of course, if you have a school that has an enrollment that had students enrolled at some point, so maybe in fall one, you weren't operating the school, but then after the census day, you started operating the school, then by all means, you have to submit their enrollments, CalPAS, their NF, the entire student profile information, and any other end of year requirements, right? Okay, so CERT4 is essentially an error that triggers when you're missing the race and ethnicity, okay? So here's also a benefit of clicking on the error in CalPADS. So if you click on the error, it brings you to a version of the error list that is the user manual. And the benefit of referring to these errors is that there are some errors that have already training videos on how to resolve them. Okay, so scroll down and you should see how to resolve certain errors. Not sure if it's Nate or Marshall who had this recording, but that's how you can refer to this in the future if you encounter any CERT4 errors. But essentially, CERT4 is just stating that some of your SINF record, your demographic is missing the race and ethnicity data. So if you're wondering, hey, how come I'm getting a cert 4 when I've already cleared that in fall 1? Well, if you've submitted a new SINF file after Census Day, after fall 1, then of course CalPADS will use that because we're tracking information based on the entire academic year. So we have your pinnacles, and the demographic record is missing the race code. So I said no for the race code missing indicator. So it's not missing, so I have to account for that race, right? So submit a file if you have, make sure that it accounts for the race codes and other indicators here. So for end of year cert 4, you have to make sure that this part here from Hispanic indicator up to the race code fields are properly ported. That's cert 4. So let's go to a end of year specific error. Okay? Or maybe let's go cert 67. Cert 67 is stating that you have an ELAS record for student not reported. So if you have new students this year who came in after end of year, after fall 1 or fall 2, maybe they started in April or early May, then you have to account for their EL status. So if a student is EO or student just joined your district from out of country and they are speaking a foreign language, then you have to mark them as a TBD and must be tested for EL or IFEP status. So you have to account for all students who are in KN to 12. KN to 12 must have a C status. So let's move on to the end of year 3 specific errors. So you have your CERT128, which is your missing student absence summary data, and CERT131. So notice that these two have the same number of records. So this means that I have not submitted my STAS and my SCNR exit file yet. So when you have the same number of counts, then that means you have not submitted your STAS or SCNR exit yet. So let's look at your 128. 128 triggers when, of course, you have not submitted your STAS file for the year. So maybe all of the schools are still open. So maybe my district, Elk Grove Unified, ends on May 26. So after May 26, when you've accounted for all absences, then of course that's the time when you start submitting data, right? So for now, if your school have not ended yet, then of course expect the CERT 128 to be in the thousands if you have thousands of students, or in the hundreds if you're a small district. Let's just say you've submitted your file and you have not posted your STAS records and you still have a CERT 128. The CERT 128 sometimes trigger because of the scenarios I've laid out earlier regarding the exemption. So if you have students in NPS school or students who had a one-day enrollment because they had their exits, their completion accounted for, or if you have students who are in college and you have to account for their enrollment, you are still required to submit the STAS record, right? You have to submit the STAS record and just mark them as a Y. Mark the exam indicator as a Y, and that should fulfill or clear your CERT 128 error. So let's look at one student here. So let's say I have this first one here. So again, we have Pinnacles. So Pinnacle started on 9/5/2022. And so you have to make sure that the student has their STAS file recorded. So just submit the STAS record. If the student is enrolled and they need to have the attendance reported, by all means submit that. If you have a student who should be exempt, still submit the STAS record with the Y indicator. Okay. So this is how it should be done. Okay. For those students who has to be exempt, just mark this as a yes, and then have everything 0. Just mark this as a yes and have the attendance days, all of these fields indicated as 0. And that should clear your CERT 128. Okay, so I have 131. Don't be alarmed if you still have thousands or hundreds of 131 when you submit your stats, because your 131 is just looking for the exit code, exit date of the students on their SCNR record. So if you have a CERT 131, you just have to submit your student enrollment exit for the year, right? You just have to close out their enrollments for the year. However, if your schools are still testing for CAS this time around, by all means, do not submit that, especially for ARIS users. I believe there is now a file for a academic year rollover. When you submit an SCNR file, please be aware that if you're still testing, you should not have an exit date for those students. Otherwise, those students will not be part of your roster. So only submit an SCNR exit when all of your business has been done, because you lose ownership of the student once you exit the student from CalPads. Okay, so this is the last process you have to do, the last file, I guess, to exit the students from CalPads. So now, of course, if you have just one student that you need to exit, then by all means, click on this, on show, and then go back here and exit the student. And that should clear your 131. Okay, so I have also CERT 129. CERT 129 trigger when the expected attendance days is greater than total enrollment days. Okay. Okay. So I have student Oscar the Grouch who started in April, right? And then I submitted a stats file. I get a CERT 129, and it says the attendance days is greater than expected days. And you wonder, how do I resolve this error, CERT 129? So the short answer is, if you have not exited your student enrollment yet, then the CERT 129 will trigger. Because especially for students whose enrollment date is close, is during springtime or close to May 15. Okay? When you submit a STAS file and you have your exit, SNR exit still open, then CalPAS will use May 15 as a default date to calculate if your attendance days are valid. Okay? So if you have not submitted an exit date yet, an exit reason, and you get a CERT 129, then you can leave the error alone. Once you've submitted the SNR exit, it should then clear your CERT 129. However, let's say you have a date of March 20 or May 20, right? Your exit date. So between that date, did I use here? Expected days 155. So to be able to properly calculate your days, we normally use this tool. There is this website that I normally use when I troubleshoot errors. So to be able to calculate your total enrollment days, you have to indicate the start, right? So this student started on 4/3. For 2023, and then you calculate the end date. So let's say the class ends on May 15. Just say May 15. And then, of course, include the end date and count only work days. So once you click on that, you have 43 calendar days. So when your file don't have an exit date, CalPAS uses that May 15, right? So unless you've exited this with the day after May 15, CalPAS will look at this having 43 calendar days as the expected days, right? So once you've exited the student, let's say May 26, right? then that's when CalPads will determine that, okay, your STAS file is valid. So let's just do June 15. Okay. So let's say your attendance extends up to June 15. Now, of course, you have 73 calendar days, right? And that's basically the same. Hopefully, this one, I'm not sure what date I use here. So it's 55 days. So let's just assume this is. So it turns out your date is May 27. That's the last day of school. So you have 55 days. And so going back to the student's record, you have an expected days of 55. Okay. And then you have, of course, a days attended, 54, and 1 day of suspension. So that's how to properly calculate your duration days. Okay. You can use this tool. You can just type duration days in your Google search and it would bring up this page. So that's how to calculate that and making sure that you have the right expected days of attendance. Then, of course, you can then adjust your STAS record and change the expected days that would match the total days that you have. And that's CERT129. Now, the last one I would like to demo is CERT156. This is the STAS record claiming an absence due to suspension. However, there is no incident reported that would justify a suspension. So if I click on CERT156, CERT156 here would say that you have a missing suspension data for a student who was reported as absent during an out of school or in school suspension. Okay. So another benefit of clicking on the error is that you can see if there is an active defect in CalPads. So if you have a CERT 156, it appears that there's a defect wherein CERT 156 triggers incorrectly for incidents involving the 21-22 period. And and you look at your data and you don't have any incidents specific to that, then of course you are impacted by this defect. So this is another advantage why you should just click on the error button in CalPads. You have here a defect, and if there are no defects, then there are also other additional tutorials that you could look at. So anyway, CERT 156 is stating that you are claiming a suspension for a student. However, there is no suspension incident that would justify a suspension, right? So it happened for Oscar the Grouch. I claimed a suspension of 1 day. However, if I go to the incident results page, that there are no incidents reported for the student. So to correct this, you just have to submit the student's incident data showing a 1 day of suspension or showing a suspension result for an incident. It doesn't require, the validation will not look at the number of days of suspension. It will only look for an incident that resulted to a suspension. So if you only have one record left to clear, rather than submitting an entire file of SyncSearSoft, you can just go to online maintenance and go to incident data, and you can manually add that one incident here. Okay. Filters, and then you can click on add new incident. Or if the student is involved in an incident at a school, then locate that incident and then click on open and add the student to that incident. Now, if you have a separate incident, then just click on add new incident and report all of the necessary information. And that should clear your CERT 156. Okay. I'm getting tons of CERT 153 missing student incident results record for students error. even though the CERS file has been uploaded and posted, what would cause so many of these errors? Number one, it could be a timing issue. Number two, it maybe missing those records that you mentioned. So if you have tons of errors regarding CERT 153, maybe send us a ticket so that we could investigate it. Here's another reason. If you submitted a file that is not complete, then it overwrites those records in CalPads. So with end of year 3, please be aware of the replacement type processing that some of the files use. If you go here to functionality, online maintenance, and upload and file upload. So you have here your record type processing table. So be aware that majority of the end of year files, you have sync and stas. So majority of your syncs your soft uses replacement processing, and it uses this operational keys to determine if a record in CalPads exists, right? And then it overwrites that. So let's say you submitted files and then turn around and submitted a different batch of records. So it deleted the other sync records, or it deleted the CERS records. That then impact how you report your data. So be aware that when you submit your incidents, always make sure that you submit all of the files, all of the records for each school. Otherwise, you might end up orphaning records, and the CERT 53 might be causing that too. Errors are triggering. It could also be a known issue, or it could be just something with regards to how you uploaded files to CalPads. So that's how to resolve an error in CalPads. And so once you've resolved all of your errors, you've brought down your errors to 0, then you can move on and review the reports. So to take advantage of the report mapping guide, which Nate will be using as an example later on to how to interpret reports. So this is your report mapping guides for end of year 3. This is this, and then it gives you all of the field elements and how the values were derived. Okay? So with that, I'm passing back the mic to Nate, who will take us home.
Thank you, Kyron.